Hi, good morning, SCIHP patients and SCIHP community. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Betty Arterberry and I am the CEO. And I am very happy to have two of our providers with me this morning. And we are going to be talking, and I'm going to be asking them questions in regards to COVID-19. I know some of these questions are the same questions as you may have. So I've invited Dr. Mark Goodwin, who is our medical director, and Dr. Ellen Cruz-Maggie. Do either one of you have anything to say before we get started with our questions?
Not really, just glad to be here. I think it's a good opportunity, for us to just have kind of a information session and talk about things. We have our nice COVID model that Dr. Cruz-Maggie brought, so that's awesome.
Yeah.
And, we're just kind of glad to be here.
All right, well, thank you. So I can get started with the first question, and I'm just gonna ask the question, and so either one of you, feel free to respond.
Sure.
So how does COVID vaccines work?
Well, go ahead, Dr. Cruz-Maggie.
Almost all of the vaccines incorporate some of the spike protein. So here would be, you would say this is the COVID virus. And on the outside of the COVID virus are the spikes. And the spikes are what as the COVID is coming into the body, the spikes are what attach to your cells. So part of the vaccine is they take some of the genetic material from just the spike, not the virus at all, just the spike, and they incorporate that into the vaccine. They inject the vaccine into your arm, and then your body, in a couple of different ways, makes antibodies to just the spike protein, and that antibody stays with you in memory cells. And then if you, in the future, if the virus comes into your system, the body recognizes the spike protein and then kills the virus.
Okay.
And so when you get the vaccine, there's nothing live in it. There's no live virus in the vaccine, only the genetic material to make the spike protein.
And that's the thing that we hear about, a lot is this mRNA, and the mRNA is a little piece of genetic material that has the directions to make the spike. So a lot of times people are worried about getting COVID from the vaccine. And when I talk to patients, a lot of times I tell them that's like trying to build a car just from a hubcap. And so you can recognize a car by looking at the hubcap and say, oh yeah, that's a 56 Chevy or something like that. And that's what our immune system does. But the virus can't build the engine and all the other parts that you need because the information isn't there.
How do we know that COVID-19 vaccines are safe?
Well, it's really been an incredibly interesting year. And so, to answer that question, I'd just like to sort of give some context to it. So far, we've administered in this country more than 150 million doses. And that's the largest vaccine rollout ever, in the history of medicine. The likelihood of severe adverse effects is less than 0.5%. So that's, real numbers, so it's very tiny. And those are really only possible adverse effects because it's been looked at, and everything is being reported. So there's really tons of data on these vaccines. So really, they have been very, very safe, and they've been monitored incredibly closely, for side effects. And we can talk a little bit more later about maybe specific concerns about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, that's a little bit later on, but they have been really, really successful. And, to put that in context, we're approaching 600,000 deaths from COVID.
Right.
And just about every one of them would have been prevented if those people were immunized beforehand. So it's really safe and really effective.
So too, I believe I've heard that if you do get the vaccine, you get vaccinated, and say you did somehow get COVID, is it as, does it get as bad as if you did not get vaccinated? You know, the disease, is it gonna be more effective or less effective, or?
Yeah, absolutely. The people who have been vaccinated and despite the vaccine might have gotten a case of COVID, they get a very, very mild case. They don't end up in the hospital, they don't end up passing away, they might get a very mild case. When you get the COVID, the Moderna and the Pfizer, they're about, when you get both vaccines, about 95% effective, but there still might be some breakthrough. 5% of the people might still either get might get a mild case. So definitely the people that have had the vaccine and somehow get exposed and have breakthrough get a very mild case.
Yeah, and you know, the most significant thing of all that is when you look at all three vaccines that have been released in this country, Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson, they have essentially 100% protection from death and hospitalization for COVID across the board. So they've been incredibly
How
effective.
were the vaccines made so quickly? How did that happen? I know a lot of people have been, asking that.
Sure. Well, it's interesting because this virus only really came into existence a little bit over a year ago. So when you look at what's happened, it's an incredible story, really. Once it was identified, the code, the DNA for the virus was sequenced very quickly, and so they had the blueprint for how this virus makes itself. And then normally when a new medicine or a vaccine is developed, people have probably heard of different phases of trials. So there's 3 phases: phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. And in phase 1 will be a very limited number of people, maybe 100 or 200 people, when they have a new vaccine or a new product, and they'll just test and make sure that it's safe. Then in phase 2, they'll have some thousands of people, and they start looking to see not only is it safe, but does it work?
Mm-hmm.
And then when you get through phase 2, you go to phase 3, and normally they follow each other. And then in phase 3, they'll have 30, 40, 50,000 people, and they'll really look at big numbers. What they did with this was instead of waiting until the phases were entirely over, they were able to overlap them. So they didn't skip any. They compressed the phases of the trials, and that brought the product to market more quickly than it normally would. Mm-hmm. So they actually started making the vaccine, and it was a little bit of a risk, that they didn't know, because if it didn't pass the phases, they would have had to throw them out.
Right.
But it turns out, though, that they were able to get through that and make an effective vaccine in maybe 1/3 or 1/4 of the amount of time, but still paying attention to safety.
Right. Yeah.
And the technology that allowed for the mRNA vaccine has been in development and studied for over 10 years. And so all that technology was in information and knowledge was in place, and they quickly shifted their lab work over to the production of the vaccine. So it was all in place, ready to go.
Okay.
And actually one of the other things too is that we hear about the 3 or 4 or 5 different vaccines that are available
Right.
around the world,
Yes.
but there were dozens of companies that were all doing this at the same time. And so the ones that we see are the ones that came to market because they were safe and because they were effective.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Can COVID vaccines give someone COVID-19? I think we kind of talked a little bit about that.
No, it absolutely cannot give you COVID-19. Absolutely not. There are no live particles, no live viruses in the vaccine. Absolutely not.
Okay, thank you. Will Pfizer and Moderna mRNA vaccines change anyone's genes?
No, absolutely not.
That's actually not possible on a biological basis. and for a couple of reasons. First of all, those are mRNA vaccines, and mRNA cannot become part of DNA, and it has no way of becoming incorporated in the DNA of a person. And the other thing with mRNA is it only lasts for a very short amount of time within the body, definitely less than 72 hours. So when you get the vaccine, that mRNA, like we said before, gives the instructions to the person's body of how to make the antibody, the part of the immune system, against the spike protein. That's it.
Okay.
You know, and it does not become incorporated as a permanent part of our body anywhere.
Thank you. What is the difference between the mRNA vaccines and the J&J vaccine?
I'll let you.
Okay, so there's a little there's a subtle difference. The Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines are both mRNA vaccines. The Johnson & Johnson is actually a DNA vaccine, but the DNA also gives the instructions of how to make an antibody to that spike protein. And so they're a little bit different, but essentially they do the same thing in the end. And that cannot become incorporated either. It can't be part of a person's DNA.
Okay.
And the Pfizer and the Moderna are sort of separate. They've never had any of the risk factors that the Johnson & Johnson has. And some of the current research is that they do not think it has anything to do with the virus or this protein. They think it has something to do with the delivery system from the Johnson & Johnson that has caused the blood clotting problems. And so they're completely separate in terms of risk. There's no risk. There have been no cases with the Pfizer or no cases with the Moderna of the cases that have happened with the Johnson & Johnson. And of the Johnson & Johnson, they've given probably about 7-8 million doses in the United States, and it's usually about 1 per million of the severe side effects.
The main side effects of the vaccine.
So I'll answer that one. I mean, many times with the first dose, people get very few side effects. Sometimes more side effects with the second dose because the body has already recognized it, and now, you know, that now it recognizes the second dose a little better. But you know, almost everyone will get muscle soreness. Some people will get a little rash on their arm. Occasionally people will feel some fatigue for 24 or 48 hours. Occasionally they'll have low-grade fever. Occasionally they could have some chills, a little bit of weakness. Almost everyone that gets some side effects, it lasts about 24 hours. It usually does not go on for days. And so for that reason, we do recommend people, you know, maybe consider taking the next day off from work or getting it late in the week. But sometimes people can get headaches. So there's a variety of different symptoms, but most of them are mild, and most of them only last for about 24 hours.
And you know, one other interesting thing too is that if people don't get those side effects, it doesn't mean that the vaccine's not working. It just means that they're lucky.
So that's all the questions that I have right now. And I want to thank both of you very much for being here, for answering these questions. These are questions that have come in from, you know, from different people, from the community, and just, you know, just hearing it throughout the, you know, the clinic. Even, you know, some of our personnel have these questions and things like that, because, you know, people are still making choices, or they're still, you know, thinking about it. And so we wanted to present these questions and hopefully, you know, get more of our community vaccinated. Those that are watching this, I really hope that you really, if you're not vaccinated, that you're going to really think about it and really make that decision and that choice, not only for yourself, but for your relatives, your loved ones, your friends, and as I said earlier, getting back to some kind of normal life,
Sure.
and being able to, you know, do our events, go to your events that you normally go to, and you know, because it's getting that time, it's getting into the summer, and I think being vaccinated, you're gonna feel much more safe out. So I want to thank you. You guys have anything to add?
Well, I would just say that I'm grateful for working here because I was able to get the vaccine much quicker than many other doctors in Sonoma County. So I'm grateful for working here. I'm grateful that I was able to get the vaccine so quickly. My neighbors, they had to drive to Sacramento to get the vaccine. So, I mean, you know, people were clamoring to get the vaccine, and we were lucky enough to have a sufficient supply here for everyone that wants to have it.
Yes.
Yeah, Skip and Indian Health have done a great job. you
Yes.
know, And for anybody who is interested in being vaccinated, all you need to do is call the clinic.